Let's get rolling here. So we are super lucky again to have Jeremy, wild-haired Jeremy. And for those, I think most people have been on a session with Jeremy. I know Michelle hasn't, but anyway, Jeremy has a very long history in the bike industry, from bike shop owner to working with big bike companies. And I think a common theme we always, see or get asked is bike maintenance, and not at a super high level, more at the level of like, what can I actually do? I get to a certain point where I'm like, I'm taking my bike into the shop because I don't want to mess it up. But there's lots of things that, I know that I can do just to make my bike run better and be cleaner and all that stuff. So we did have a couple of questions submitted, so I think Jeremy's probably going to start there. And Jeremy, I'll let you take it away. And I'm sure, like, if there's questions as you go, just jump in there and fire away, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, and guys, if you want a better camera angle, don't hesitate. Tell me. I'm fairly mobile with the computer. I can actually get it close up if you want a little bit of a better view. So thanks again for having me. I appreciate it. One of the first questions I want to actually start off with is one of the ones that Jasper texted to me, which was the differences between a lot of the new wheel technology that's come out. Someone was asking about tubeless technology versus tubular versus clincher. So show of hands, because I can see all of you guys at least, who understands the difference between the three? Okay, so, all right. So one person understands the difference between the three. Fantastic. So there's a dead wheel, meaning it's got no tire on it and no cassette. Tubeless and clincher technology use the same concept in the sense of how a tire mounts onto the rim. Okay, so there's actually a big U, and then at the top of the U, there are two hooks that actually have a pronounced feel to them if you stick a fingernail into them. Tubular tires have a completely different surface, and that's what these wheels are, is a tubular. So this is actually solid, and then you glue your tire physically onto that solid piece of the wheel. Tubulars have kind of gone the way of the dodo, in the sense of they're not being used as much by pros. They're not being used by as many age group athletes now, because technologies have changed, especially on the bike side, where wheels have gotten a lot wider and fatter. And with doing that, what companies have done is they're now actually sealing the center channel of a clincher, so you can put a tire right on here without an inner tube. And when you do that, you then need to actually put a fluid inside the tire, like a sealant, so that if you do get a small little pinprick, it'll seal up and keep the air inside. And that's what tubeless technology is. If you do get a hole in a tubeless tire and the sealant goes flying through, it doesn't seal, you can actually unhook it and put an inner tube into it, and then run it as an inner tubed tire or a clincher tire. Does that make sense? Kind of, sort of. I'm seeing some head nods. All right, so why would people want to run tubeless? It's lighter. It gives you way more options, meaning that you don't have an inner tube inside and then have to carry another inner tube or two inner tubes on your bike. You can actually simplify. You can carry one inner tube, which is a lot smaller piece on your bike to carry. You can carry multiples if you're going to have, or if you're planning to have two flats, or not planning but want to be prepared for two flats. The sealant inside actually will also help protect against any of those pinpricks like I mentioned, but it is a lot lighter than having an inner tube in there. The other advantage is that with a tubeless tire, because of the wider rim profiles, you can actually run a wider tire, which means you're going to keep your tire pressure lower. So your tire pressure, if you're not familiar with that, I'll come back to that. But with that tubeless technology, you can actually run lower tire pressure, which is going to give you a lot more cush on the bike. So it's going to make the roads feel a lot more comfortable. So if you've ridden the original Ironman Canada course out in Penticton, everybody hated the out and back at Coston because of how rough the roads were. They also really, really, really hated that ride down Richter Pass, again, with how rough the roads were, especially if you had to actually veer onto the shoulders. So that softer tire technology is going to actually give you a little bit more cushion, a little bit more comfort on your bike and on your ride. If you have to run the Clincher inner tube in there as a backup, it'll actually pump the tire up a little bit harder, so it will be a little bit rougher of a ride. Tubular technology, a lot of guys will run lower tire pressures because it's a sealed system. And because it's fully sealed, you can actually get that cushion, that comfort from it. But it's a lighter system in general because you don't have to really overbuild the external part of the wheel. The only part you really need to focus on is the brake surface. A little easier, a little better.
Now, quick question for you, which is the thing that I was always most interested in is, like, what's the fastest? I mean, if I go back to when I started racing, we used 19 mil tires at 150 PSI. It was like riding on a rock, but that's what we thought at the time was faster with a tubular. Now, has that changed?
It has. Tire pressure is all related to volume. So if you think about a car tire is actually going to be between 35 and 40 PSI. And you think about the weight that actually holds in a car. Your bike tires, depending on the width of the tire, you'll run them at anywhere from 80 to 110 PSI. Even though the tires will be rated for higher PSIs, you'll want to run them in between that. That's kind of the sweet spot. And one of the reasons that it's considered the sweet spot is if you go higher than 110, your wheel actually bounces on the ground on the concrete. If you go lower than 80, then the tire smushes too much. And actually the risk for unhooking it is a lot higher. It's what we call burping a tire. So where the tire actually physically decompresses, unhooks from the rims, and then either hooks back in because of elasticity, or will miss the hook and then you get a pinch flat or a large flat. So that's kind of that sweet spot. A lot of it has to do with the shape of the tire now and the shape of the wheel. So in the last 5 years, the aerodynamic side of this has changed from thin is win to fat is better. And that's why you're seeing all these wider rim shapes. And what they're doing is they're trying to create a toroidal shape that matches up with the tire, so you don't get a trip off of the tire. What you end up getting is actually a seamless flow or a laminar flow off of the rim and the tire as an interface. So that tire pressure is going to be dependent. So if you're running 25 mil tires, you should be running 80 to 90 PSI. If you're running 23 mil tires, you should be running 90 to 105 PSI, and at the absolute extreme 110.
Is that like, I think this is one of the small little things people often struggle with. I know I did. And it's like, what do I personally pump my tires up to? Is it weight dependent? Like if I'm 100 pounds, is it different than if I'm 200 pounds? Like I remember my rule was I pumped up the pressure to my body weight, which was probably completely misled. I don't know where I got it from, but I had 19 mil tubulars, and so I'd pump them up to 130 pounds, and then at least I had a number to work with.
Yeah, and that actually comes from track cycling. If you're on a track, which is a smoother surface, and you're on 19 mil tires, because you want to be on as narrow a tire as possible to actually reduce the road friction or the actual surface friction, then yeah, you'll want to pump those up as high as you can get. And that's where that came from, and that's where it transferred from, is from the track to the road. But no, nowadays it's really, really different. In 2008, Vancouver hosted the World Championships for ITU. And this is the Olympic course distances. So we had sprints, super sprints, and the Olympic course over 3 days in downtown Vancouver. And Zip Wheels actually sent an engineer to work with us as a sponsor, but also just to help out because they were really, really embedded with the ITU. I ended up spending 3 days working with Dave Ripley, who was the head engineer for wheel technology. And we pumped up close to 3,000 tires between him and I over those 3 days. And I listened to him say this 3,000 times. Do not exceed 100 PSI on your tires. We had athletes who were professionals. We had athletes who were semi-professionals. We had age group athletes from all over the world that would come to us with their tires. And the first question Dave would ask is, what tire pressure do you want? And everybody was going well beyond 120. Jack them up. The tire says it can take 200, put in 200. And I listened to Dave tell all these athletes, you are doing yourself no help right now. You're actually bouncing, you're spending more time in the air. So tire pressure is all really now that magic number of 80 to 110 at most, and it has to do with the tire width. So if you're running those 25s, bring that tire pressure down. If you're going to run 28s, or if you're running, for example, on a gravel bike, you'll run like 36 mil tires out to 44 mil tires. On my gravel bike, so this bike right here, I'll only run up to 35 PSI. That's it. And those are 33s on there. So it gives you an idea of what that tire pressure is relative to volume. It doesn't have anything to do with your weight. Again,
yeah, my gravel bike has 42s, I think, and I run 35 max. I won't go above 35 PSI.
Yep. Yeah. On your gravel bike, you could actually, if you're running tubeless, you could bring that tire pressure right down to about 22 to 24, depending on what riding you're really doing. If you're doing more dirt riding and you want lots of grippy traction in corners, bring that tire pressure right down. If you're actually on the gravel, bring it up to 30, 35.
I usually I have to start on the road to get to the gravel, but if I'm like going out to Port Moody or something and then going to do like a long gravel ride, as soon as we actually get to the trails, I'll let a bunch of air out and then just drink beer and then take the SkyTrain back on the way home.
You sound like a cyclocross racer.
I haven't ever raced cross, but it's coming.
Oh, it's a blast.
It might be the only race season we have this year, so.
Well, let's hope.
Yeah.
And actually, as a triathlete, cyclocross is one of the best off-season training regimens that you can do because it teaches you how to mount a bike very quickly.
Yeah, bike handling's good. Like when I started riding gravel, I really noticed. I started riding a bit of gravel, then I raced last year, like on the road, and I've really noticed that's helped my bike handling skills immensely. Like so useful. Yeah. So what would you recommend for like a 28 millimeter tire? Because I have a pair of carbon wheels that I can fit a 28 millimeter tire in my frame. And usually I run a latex tube in them. So like 85?
Well, first off, before you run the 28s, what wheels are you putting them on?
The Rolf Prima something.
Okay. All right. So this is the most secretive part of information of the bike industry right now, in the sense that if you guys can see in between here, this inner diameter of the rim is what factors the shape of your tire. So you're running the Rolf Primas, right?
Yeah.
You want to actually be able to measure the inside. If the inside is greater than 17 mils, right? So if it's 19 to 21 mils, your 28 mil tire, even though it's stamped 28, is going to measure 32.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the easiest way to check that
But the inside, right?
the inside. So you have to take the tire off.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So the easiest way to check that is to actually use a set of calipers.
Yeah.
And then you just took that on the inside, like so. If it's bigger than 17 mils, that tire is going to actually go out 3 to 5 mils. If it's 17 mils, a 28 mil tire is actually going to measure out close to 30 on that rim. So if you're looking at 28 mils of clearance that you have that's allowed, then you should be running 25 mil stamped tires, because they'll actually measure 27.
Okay.
Okay, so this is actually one of the biggest, I don't want to say bones of contention in the bike industry, but it's the biggest misnomer right now. People go out and buy a 28 mil tire because the frame manufacturer says we can accommodate 28 mil tires.
Yeah.
When you put those on your wheel, they might actually balloon out wider. They might balloon out taller. So once you've actually pumped them up, if you use those same calipers and put them on the tire, that'll actually also tell you what your measured width is and what
Okay.
your measured height is.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
We'll measure.
All right. Any other questions on the tires or the tube technology? Okay. So the next question that I did get was, and this came from Lindsay, was about lube. When to use dry lube, when to use wet lube. Do you have to actually degrease in between? What are those appropriate seasons? So for those of us that live on the wet coast, it's real easy. Dry lube goes on when it's dry, wet lube goes on when it's wet. But you have to degrease in between. So if you think about it in that sense, one lube on one side of the degreaser, the other lube on the other side of the degreaser. Dry lube goes on when it's dry season, wet lube goes on when it's wet season, but you have to degrease in between. If you don't degrease and you mix your lube, they will actually clump up and chemically react, and they will actually wear your chain down to at least half its life. Most chains will get 3,000 to 5,000 kilometers on them. Okay,
So degreaser, you mentioned this last time. Is this just something I go buy at the hardware store, or is this a bike store specific type of degreaser for chains? What am I looking for? What brand?
No, you have to actually make it yourself. You have to milk 2 goats, 4 cows, and a bull.
I just happen to have all of those things.
Amazing. So using my Dawn dish soap is not acceptable as a degreaser for my bike?
Actually, Dawn dish soap is acceptable as a degreaser. You have to dilute it though.
Yes.
And
The blue one, right?
blue, green, doesn't matter. Joanna, you have a question.
Well, I may say something sinful here as you guys are all joking around, but what's like the take on WD-40?
So the WD actually stands for water displacement. So WD-40 is not a degreaser. It's actually, it's something that will actually remove water, but it will not remove grease.
Okay.
Okay, so WD-40 is something that should never, ever, ever touch a bike. Ever. It's not lube. It's not oil. The only time that you ever want to use that on a mechanical part is if you're actually trying to remove water and keep residue on there. So it's very handy on engine parts for cars.
Okay.
I have a dumb question. What is the difference between dry lube and wet lube?
Chemical compound.
Don't understand. Okay.
So wet lube actually is designed to seal, and a dry lube is designed to actually push out.
And like, will they say that on, like, cause like my bottle of lube just says Pro Link Chain something.
Which one do you have? I'm gonna force her to go downstairs and get it, and leave up the camera so everybody can judge her.
I have a question about.
Okay, so that's actually a dry lube.
Oh,
How do you tell?
yeah. Like, where on this does it tell me, hello, my name is ProLink and I am a dry lube?
It won't. They color coded their labels.
They color coded them.
Yeah.
That's crazy. That seems like it seems like a really big deal if you mix lubes, and they should then make this the most obvious thing on the packaging.
So this company, Finish Line, I don't know if you guys can see this. Sorry, I put it there. Okay. Their wet lube, their label is green. Their dry lube, their label is red. And they actually call out wet and they'll call out dry on it, but not every manufacturer does that. So my recommendation is when you're going to buy lube, make sure it actually says dry or wet on the package somewhere.
Yeah, like this makes sense to me why I got my chain replaced in September, and then I've been using the Clincher and then just had to get it replaced.
Yeah. So one of the reasons that we changed this, and I'll come back, Joanna, I know you've got another question, right?
Well,
Yeah.
I never go outside in the rain. I always use dry.
Yeah, just basically use dry if you're never going outside.
Okay.
All right. So a dry lube, when it gets wet, will wash off. And a wet lube, when it gets wet, will not wash off. That's the main differences between them. So when you're running them on a dry day, or if you're running dry lube and you get into a rainy day, when you get home, you're going to have to re-lube the chain. You want to let it dry itself off, or you'll want to dry it with a rag. And the easiest way to dry it with a rag, so I've already prepped up, took an old t-shirt, cut it up, and before I even put the lube on, if I'm coming back from a wet day, I'll get the bike up and I'll grab the bottom of the chain. So let's see if you guys can see this a little better. I'll grab the bottom of the chain and pedal backwards and just clean the chain or dry the chain off a bit. And you don't need a whole ton of pressure on that, okay? But you'll do the sides, and then you'll actually hold the verticals and do the verticals so that you get inside bushings. And that's the same way you'll degrease. The difference being that you'll actually pour a little bit of degreaser onto the actual rag itself.
So, Jeremy, yeah, can you show us the brand of degreaser? Because your answer before was that I needed 2 goats and a cow and
4 cows.
4 cows.
So degreaser, you'll want to buy at a bike shop. You can use dish soap, like Dawn in particular is quite good.
Yeah, so my question was about degreaser, because this is the WD-40 industrial strength cleaner and degreaser, so not this.
Okay, so WD-40 as a brand has actually started making bike stuff. So that actually is their bike degreaser.
Okay.
You can use it.
Okay.
I personally, I have tried it. I haven't been a huge fan.
Well, yeah, I wasn't loving it, but I had it, so I thought, use it.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Left alone.
I think Jeremy.
MEC, if you're buying their stuff, you can buy it in bulk, so it's a massive plastic 2-liter container. So I'll just turn this up a couple of times, and I want to create about a toonie size wet spot on my rag. And then, again, I'm not putting much pressure on it, but I'm just pedaling backwards. So that was the sides. And then now I'll do the north-south. And I'll let that sit, and you'll really, really, really love the contact high you get off of this stuff.
And sorry, what brand was that again, Jeremy? I missed it.
So it's I like the Finish Line and the Pedros personally.
Yeah.
They run a little cleaner. They don't leave as much residue behind. Most bike shops have them in bulk. It's pretty easy to find, and they're not cheap. This size here, to give you guys an idea of how long this has lasted, I've had this for 3 years. Okay.
Wow.
A lot of people will also use plastic chain cleaners. So those are the enclosed chain cleaner aspects that you actually mount onto the bike, and then you pedal through, and it has a whole pile of brushes. Degreaser that size will only last me about 7 or 8 chain cleans in those plastic bits, because you have to pour so much in to actually get it to actually spill up. They're nice units because they enclose everything. They really do a good job of brushing the chain off, and they actually take all the dirty stuff and house it. The downside is that you go through a lot of degreaser with those.
My poor person's bike housing chain cleaner is 2 old toothbrushes soaked in degreaser. And if you hold them both in one hand and clamp them around the chain and then go back, and then you can also do the north-south. I find that works really well. And then it's not using a lot, but you're getting inside, because some, especially winter riding, is super gritty and gross.
Yep. The only downside with it is that because of the bristles being exposed, you get a lot of spray. So if your chain's really, really dirty, you'll get a lot of spray on the back wall.
Yeah, I'm in a parking garage anyway, so it doesn't matter when I do that so much, but that's, yeah.
Even one tooth brush and the chain. If you do regular basis and clean your chain on a regular basis, you shouldn't need the toothbrushes. Those come in really handy when it gets really dirty and really mucky. So if your chain is like pitch black, so if it's the same color as your black bike, then toothbrushes might be a little bit more handy.
And
So now I've let
Vancouver,
that
I ride in the
sit for a
winter.
bit. Yeah. Now that I let that sit for a bit, I'm actually going to put my lube on.
And how long do you let it sit for?
Not long, 3-4 minutes. You just want to let it the degreaser evaporate a bit.
Okay.
Right. So I'm going to apply my dry lube. And again, with the bike elevated, this is pretty easy for me because I'll actually just tip this up on the top of the cassette. I'm just going to put that more center. I'll rest my hand on the derailleur and slowly pedal while I'm squeezing the lube. And I'm going to go around 2 or 3 times. And then now what I'll do is just to spread it out, run it through all the gears.
So, Jeremy,
Yes.
I know one mistake I used to make was like putting way too much lube on. Like you don't actually need that much, do you? I used to douse it in there. I'd be like, more is better, but it's not really, is it?
More is not better, but if you over lube, you'll notice because it'll start to drip, right? Again, take a dry rag and just hold it south. Run the chain back. Then put north and run the chain back. Off any of the X. So if you feel like
you're freezing a bit there, you're freezing a bit. Basically, you just kind of lightly touch it and damp off the excess, right?
Yep. Yeah, run the chain through just so that run the chain through and that'll clean the excess off. So if you feel like you've put too much on, give it a bit of a clean.
Okay.
And Jeremy, do you do this after every ride?
No, I won't lube every ride. No, I'll clean my chain once a month. If I'm riding 3 to 4 days a week, once a month is more than enough, and that'll help keep it clean. And what I will do at that time is I'll also clean the cassette as well.
So Jeremy, I'll ask you a question while you're pulling the wheel off here.
Yep.
So I heard you say that if you apply dry lube and it rains, it just washes it off.
Yes.
But what if you have wet lube and it's dry? Does it matter?
Nope. No. Wet lube in the dry it just runs a little rougher and a little dirtier. So you'll get a little bit more grit on the back of your leg. It'll spray a little bit more off of the back of the bike when it does get eventually wet. But in the dry, it runs fine.
Okay.
I know professional athletes that have run wet lube year round and guys that live in Arizona.
And why are they just making them like they just don't know what they're doing, or they prefer it for some reason?
Honestly, it's laziness.
Oh, okay.
They don't want to think about it.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
So easiest way to clean your cassette, if you've actually degreased the chain, is to use the exact same rag. All right. And then you fold the rag in half. So you create a little bit of a thicker fold down the middle. And if you push the wheel up against something solid, lean it up against your hip. All right. Sorry, you guys can't see. Right. And then what you do is just grab either end and stick the rag in between 2 cogs, and you just pull side to side. This is what we call flossing a cassette. Saves you from actually taking the cassette off, but you can actually physically go through each cog and clean it. The reason that we call it flossing the cassette is that the cassette is going to rotate in one direction. So when you pull the rag in that direction, the cassette's going to rotate. And then when you pull opposite, it actually stays. So you can pull all the dirt out. And then you pull the cassette over, pull the dirt out, pull the cassette over, pull the dirt out. That's the easiest way to clean that cassette. Once that's clean, back on the bike, and then apply your lube. Any questions on any of that? Nobody. Great.
Do you use the degreaser on the cassette too?
Yeah, degreaser on the cassette. And then you don't need to lube the cassette.
Because the chain will lube it as it goes.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Now how about cleaning the frame? So I'll actually use baby wipes. But if they don't have those, basic Windex or Simple Green, and you can spray this right onto the bike. And then same idea with your t-shirt rag or with a t-shirt rag. Just wipe it all off. And you can spray the whole bike with Windex or Simple Green. All right.
I remember you saying, Jeremy, on the last one, just like how important having a clean frame is for speed, let alone aesthetics. Like it's actually just faster.
Yep, it is faster. You know, you think about how mucky a bike will get in training, especially in the winter months, and it'll get really, really dirty. And all that dirt just actually piles on. So if you've got a frame that's designed for aerodynamics like a tri-bike is, then the dirtier it gets, the more you're actually tripping air off of the frame. The cleaner it is, the smoother the air is going to actually blow over the frame. There's also a psychological aspect to it too. How do you guys feel when you drive a freshly cleaned car? You feel pretty important and pretty special. Same thing with your bike. You know, it's race day. It's your A day. It's the biggest day. You've spent a year of your life training for that one day, that one moment. Why not do it on a clean bike? You're going to feel that much better about your race while you're racing. And if you are one of those athletes that has to actually tape your food to your top tube, I don't really think you want to tape it onto dirt and mud and road grime, do you? Because you're putting that food in your mouth.
Yeah, and in the old days, we used to actually put like straight up power bars wrapped around the thing without any wrappers.
Yep.
That was pretty nasty.
Yep.
That's what I do. I lick the Cliff Blocks and stick them on my top tube.
You do not.
Yeah.
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 Wow, that's pretty wild.
Easy to grab.
Never heard of
That's
Lindsay, that's pretty awesome of you to admit. Jasper, you can kick her off the call now.
That's amazing.
I do that.
Yeah, a lot of girls do.
I do it in crit races because like everything's too fast. You don't have time to reach into the pocket to get something. You're like, oh, I have a 10 seconds straight away.
I love it.
Why
Yeah,
are you
or
eating
mountain
a crate?
biking, it's too hard to like open stuff. So
Yeah,
they get a little gritty, but
they're right there.
Yeah. Michelle, you should never ever eat in a crit race.
Yeah, sometimes. It's like some of the longer ones, they're long. It's like an hour.
Yeah. You shouldn't have to eat in an hour. Drink maybe, but eat.
Yeah, sometimes it's easier.
Yeah.
If you ride to the crit, you need to eat by the time you're racing.
Yeah, but if you're riding to the crit, you can get in. You have time to get into your jersey pockets.
It depends on who you're riding to the crit with.
You and I have much we can discuss. Storing your food, just so you guys do know, if you are putting those blocks on your bike, you are actually taking a penalty aerodynamically.
Oh, oh, wow, that's illegal? No, okay. Penalty. Yeah.
Aerodynamic penalty, right? That's one of the reasons why all these bike manufacturers have created bento boxes or in storage. Is anybody riding a P5X from Cervelo? Okay. Anybody riding a Specialized S-Works? What are they calling that?
Yeah.
Yeah, the new one.
Yeah, with the long back thing. I'm not, but.
Okay. All right. So that long back thing isn't for food, but they actually have an internal storage for food right up on the top tube. And the reason for that is that aerodynamically, when you put the food on there, you're going to take that penalty. Now, granted, that penalty is going to actually decrease as you eat the food, but that usually is going to take you 6 to 8 hours.
Huh.
So definitely think about what you're doing with your food. We did cover that in the aerodynamic stages. And now that we're riding indoors, now's a perfect time for you to actually think about where you're going to put your food and then try putting it there. And then for those that have troubles with opening packages while you're in the aero bars or just getting packages open, you can pre-open a lot of that stuff. Ziploc bags come in handy. I have done that. I've actually done power bars cut into squares in Ziploc bags and then put the Ziploc bag in my bento box open. And then I just have to pull a block out. The worst thing you can do is taping gels to your aero bar or your base bar. That's the worst. If you're going to tape them down the center of your top tube. But ideally, they should go into a bento box or into a jersey pocket, aerodynamically speaking. All right. Who travels with their bike? Who disassembles and reassembles their bike? Okay.
Painfully.
All right.
A lot of tears.
How comfortable are you guys with the front end, taking the front end off?
I've never taken it apart.
Okay.
I'm fine with it on my road bike, but I don't do it. I have a better case now. I don't do it for my track bike.
Okay. I'm just going to pop my rear wheel back in here for a sec. All right. So of those that travel, how many of you have a torque wrench? 1, 2, 3. Okay. All right. Who has a bike that's worth more than $1,500?
No, not anymore.
Okay, so everybody's got a bike worth more than $1,500, right? If you want to keep that bike working in pristine order, especially if you're traveling for a race, go buy a $150 torque wrench. This is going to save you your bike. If you can, make sure it comes with bits, right? So most specifically, it's the 4 and the 5 that you need. And here's the reasons why. When you're putting your front end on, a lot of people will actually undo the front stem clamp. I don't travel with the stem clamp undone because I don't want the rotation of my bars changed or altered. So I actually take my stem off from the front end of the bike. And this is one of these principles where it's, think of royalty before loyalty. All right, that's kind of the saying I try and teach people. This is the king or the queen. All right, and the king and the queen always come first, always. If you're taking it off, the king or the queen comes off first, and then the subjects second. Now you can travel with your handlebar off and you haven't changed the rotation of your bar, meaning that when the handlebar goes back on, your bars are going to be in the same place they were that you've been training and racing on. When you go to put it back on, exact same policy. Royalty before loyalty. So the king or the queen gets done first. And you can do the king or the queen as tight or as loose as you want, but I would suggest as tight.
Hey, Jeremy.
Yep.
There's an interesting one for you. Has that changed? Because I feel like I always used to over tighten that one. Like I would do it in the right order, but I feel like maybe back when I was having to do this, you actually weren't supposed to do that one very tight, or it really messed with things. Has that
Yeah.
changed?
It has changed. Cartridge bearings changed all of that. When you were racing, the bearings that were inside here were
Yes.
relatively loose, and they had a matching cone and a cup. And if
Okay.
you press them too much, then they would actually compress and it would lock the front wheel up.
That's what would happen, right? You had to be very gentle with that one.
Yeah.
But not anymore. You can.
Yeah, you want to do it snug, right?
Now, is there a torque rating for that one?
For this one, there is no torque rating,
Okay,
but for the subjects, there is.
right. Because
Okay.
that's going on to a carbon stem, usually, a carbon steer tube.
This is onto a carbon steer tube. So if you're going onto carbon, you want to go no more than 5 Newton meters.
Right.
If this
Now,
is aluminum,
let's just make sure everybody, like, not everybody has a torque wrench. They might not even know what we're talking about.
yep. So that's why I'm saying go and invest in a torque wrench, because if you're just going to use this and you're going to tighten this up, you're guessing at how tight you're going to do that. And I have seen cracked forks. Even if you crack a steer tube just up in here, that crack creates enough potential failure point that your bike, well, your fork is going to need to be replaced. And a fork is going to cost you $400.
And also, your front end is weak, and that's bad.
Yeah. Joanna, go ahead.
Well, when you say subjects, are you saying those they're in the side?
Yeah.
I'm
So,
here on top.
so think of royalty as the top.
Yeah.
Okay, and subjects are always below royalty, so the two screws below the top. Okay,
Oh, like a triangle.
Yeah.
Okay.
well, like a triangle, or the king, the queen, the loyal subjects, the pawns. Like if you think about it in the pyramid, right?
I just have like mine are all. I thought you were going into the side on something, but mine are all. There's 3 coming top, going down.
So
Okay.
these are the ones on the side, and then this is the one on the top.
Yeah, but I don't have a side one, so does it matter what the top ones?
So the one that actually compresses everything is the one that's important. What bike are you riding, Joanna?
I just had to go look and check because when you were explaining that, I was like, I don't think that's how mine is. I'm on a Trek Speed Concept, which I know is like the most irritating bike to take apart. So I just like, can you see that? Or maybe not. I just have to
Okay.
take.
So your front end actually comes off in a very different fashion.
Yeah.
And your 3 bolts to take your front end off don't compress. Your compression is below your base bar.
So what does that mean?
It doesn't mean, it means you don't have to worry about the compression. You just need to worry about when you take the bar off, that you're putting it back in the exact same spot with those same 3 bolts.
Okay.
Okay. You are definitely going to need a torque wrench for that bike if you're traveling.
Okay.
Okay. That bike has 185 screws. Yes, we've counted.
I don't know, but I know I've cried a lot.
Trust me. So have a lot of mechanics. The first speed concept that came out, we built at the shop, and normally a tri-bike build would be anywhere from an hour and a half to 4 hours. And our mechanics needed 2 full days for the very first speed concept. Now they can crack them out pretty quick and pretty easy. But yeah, the original ones, it was a little bit on the mundane side. Super fast bike. Trek like hit a massive home run with those bikes. They haven't had to change much other than some of the they simplified some of the front end stuff. But those 3 bolts, that's all you need to do to take your handlebars off, right?
Okay.
So I'm just gonna make sure I'm straight-ish. Once you've set your torque wrench up, then now you can tighten up the subjects.
I'm muted. Maybe just show like, again, like if you don't have a torque wrench, what he's talking about is you like on a torque wrench, like the screws will often, or beside the screws will tell you how tight you can do something, like on the bike itself. And then the torque wrench, you're able to adjust, like, okay, I want it to go, you know, however many Newton meters. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so you can screw it. And what happens is when you're actually like turning it, that torque wrench will eventually just stop. Like it won't allow you to go tighter.
It'll pop actually in your hands.
Pop, right.
So now that pop is the indication as to what your torque is. For example, this seat post bolt on this bike goes out to 8 Newton meters, but yet on Chris's bike, his only goes to 4 Newton meters because his is on the back on his P2. Yeah. So that's why you want to spend the money on the torque wrench.
They're not cheap, eh? $150. Like
100 to 150 bucks is what you want to spend. You can find them cheaper, but to be honest, you're getting what you pay for, right? And why you're spending that much money is that you want the calibration done on the torque wrench so that it will actually calibrate properly and give you the correct torque that you're setting it to, right? And you want the torque wrench for your seat post and for your handlebars. That's all you're really going to need it for when you're traveling. You don't need it for your wheels. You're not going to need it. Well, you don't need to use it with your pedals. It's just for those parts, right? It's a very, very handy tool. If you are using a bike shop to service your bike and they're actually tightening and untightening or checking all of the bolt tension and they're not using a torque wrench, then to be honest, do not take your tri-bike to them. Perfectly fine. Take your gravel bike to them, take your road bike to them. But if they're not using a torque wrench on your tri-bike, then they're guessing. And you're risking an expensive toy with that. So that's one of the things to ask a mechanic whenever you're dropping your bike off is, do you use a torque wrench to check the bolt tightness? If they say no, then maybe consider using a different shop.
You mentioned pedals. I don't know if anybody in this group has Garmin power pedals. That might be the one case. Don't you have to use a torque wrench for those?
Not anymore.
Oh,
Nation 3.1 don't need to use a torque wrench. The first gen and this first gen pods, you needed a torque wrench. The second gen pods, you don't.
Okay. And that was like a calibration, wasn't it? Like it had to be a certain tightness in order to transfer power properly.
Yep. Yeah, it had to be at 30 Newton meters.
Right.
So,
that's a lot.
Yeah, it's substantial. You needed a different torque wrench for that.
Like a big one.
Yep.
Yeah. But no more. No more.
No, you don't need that one anymore.
That's good.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to buy my big torque wrench for my original Garmin Vector pedals, I've got it for sale.
You should keep it. It's like it's like for the museum.
Yeah, I've got a few museum pieces and tools.
Like
that. Any other questions about this stuff so far? Pretty straightforward. Okay. All right. So, I mean, you now know how to clean your bike. You now know how to disassemble your front end for the most part, right? What's the first thing you guys are going to do?
Go get Degreaser.
Yeah, clean my
Okay.
bike.
What else are you going to buy with your Degreaser?
Some dry and wet lube.
What else are you going to buy?
Torque.
Torque wrench.
Torque
Okay.
wrench.
All right. So the first thing to buy is the torque wrench. The second thing to buy is the Degreaser. And the third thing to buy is the lube. Making sure your order of priorities are set. And then don't forget 2 goats, the 4 cows, and a bull.
Dancing around the fire naked on the second full moon of the month or whatever.
Is there a second full moon now?
That's what I'm saying. It only happens every once in a while, so you have to be prepared.
Yeah. Any other questions about this? Brahmi.
I got a question. I don't know if it's specifically related to this, but just something that I've been a bit negligent in wiping down my bike on the trainer after the trainer rides here and there.
Yep.
And now I'm hypersensitive that I don't think I've caused any corrosion or anything like that, but I just want to make sure now that it's actually sunny outside that I I do whatever maintenance I should do to clean up those screws and things that now I can see a little bit of rust or whatever.
Yep.
And that makes me nervous.
Yeah, so that's actually really, really relevant. More so now than ever, to be honest. Checking for corrosion. So just actually doing an eyeball inspection and noting where corrosion is. If you have corrosion in your stem bolts, and by inside, what I mean is if you look into the hole that you put the Allen wrench into, if there's corrosion inside there, that's one thing. I would look for corrosion on the outsides. If there's corrosion on the outsides, then you might want to consider replacing those or replacing the stem. Stem bolts are fairly inexpensive, but bike shops don't stock them on a regular basis just because there's so many different sizes, thread pitches, head sizes. You're almost better to just buy a new stem and replace the stem. If you are going to do that, you'll want to measure the stem. And the trick to measuring a stem is to know where to measure from. So there's a center clamp. If you put your measuring tape in that centering clamp and you measure to the center bolt, all right, Joanna, this doesn't apply to you because you have a speed concept, but that center bolt is going to tell you the length. So this stem right now measures at 110. All right, and stems will be in metric and in millimeters, right? So they'll be 90, 95, 100, 105, 110, 115, 120, as short as 70. That way, at least you know that you're buying the same size and the same length, so you're not messing around with your fit. The bigger area for concern is actually inside, right? The way to inspect that, Joanna, it's a little harder for you because you'd have to take your entire front end off. So if you're looking at inspecting your bike a bit more, I would suggest taking it to a shop.
Yeah.
Okay, so just like travel, taking my stem off. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take the spacers off. And then I'm going to take this top cap off. All right, now if you let it go, your front end will actually come right out of the bike. But this is the bearing you want to inspect. If you see corrosion in here, all right, any corrosion, you're going to want to replace these. If for some reason when you actually take everything off, your fork doesn't naturally drop through that bearing, chances are you actually have some corrosion already on there. If you have to take a hammer and knock this front end down to get the fork to release, you've got corrosion, so you'll want to replace those bearings.
I would suggest that if you find yourself at the point where you're taking a hammer to your bike, before actually hitting your bike, you should just take it in.
That's a good suggestion, Jazzy.
Jeremy, I have a fun story I'll quickly share. It was back in the day when to take the crank arms off your bike, there was screws, there was like weird, but there was one sort of tapping screw that was sort of like the king and queen screw that Jeremy shows you. And it wasn't a screw that had to go very tight, but it was one that you needed to take off in order to remove the cranks. And back in the day when SRMs were first coming out and we were trying to be our own mechanics and, you know, put our own SRMs on so we didn't have to take it to the shop. Anyway, I didn't realize I had to take off this one screw, and I can remember my bike on the ground. I was standing on the frame and I had my hands on the big chain rings trying to pull it off. And yeah, I should have just taken it in.
We used to love guys like that, like you, Jazzy, because we charge way more.
Oh, you could have charged me whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever.
All right. Well, thank you, Jeremy. That's helpful.
Yeah.
I don't know what triggered me at some point. I suddenly became overly nervous because I've got the towel, I do all the stuff, but then one day I was like, man, it's been a long time since I really paid attention to this. I probably wrecked my bike over the winter.
Well,
Probably okay though.
You know, Chris, winter riding indoors is the hardest on your bike. Just on the top end and on the bearings. If you're going outside in the winter, it's actually hardest on your wheels and on your bottom brackets.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So I think we've covered quite a bit in this. You guys are all master mechanics now. You can all charge your neighbors to fix their bikes. Of course, I expect Zoom calls from you all when you get into a problem.
Again, if you find yourself just about to hit your bike with a hammer in any capacity, take it in or call Jeremy before you actually make the first swing.
Is this the right size hammer?
And probably a rubber mallet rather than like an actual hammer.
Ideally a rubber mallet or a wooden mallet. Ideally, but there are times when the ball peen is needed.
Yeah. Again, please don't hit your bike with a hammer. Leave that to Jeremy.
Yeah. Any other bike related questions?
I think that's great. Yeah.
So I've got a question for all of you guys then. Who's going to go and measure their tires? All right, 1, 2. Okay, Brahmi, I can tell you already have 23 mil tires on your 303s. So your tires
Thanks. Hey.
at 23. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And tire pressure wise, what are you guys going to pump your tires to?
87.5.
I hope you have a digital pump.
So what did you say before, Jeremy, for a 23 mil tire?
100.
100. Okay.
Yep. Right. And do you care about what is stamped on the side of your tire that tells you the size of your tire?
No cares.
No cares. All right. So how do you know that you've got what size tire you've got? Measure.
Oh, the inside rim.
You can measure the inside rim, but if you've got a tire already hooked on there,
Oh,
you want to know what your tire size is, pump your tires up and then measure it.
right.
Okay. And you can eyeball it with the measuring tape if you have to. Right. You just need an approximate estimation. All right. And then lastly, who's going to continue to tape food to their bike or stick food on their bike? Lindsay,
I have 3 bikes, so I will put it on some other bikes. I just won't put it on that bike anymore. But I'm 100% going to take food to my bike still.
It's just so hard, like when you're racing on a mountain bike, the opportunities to eat, some can be few and far between. So if it's right there.
Mountain biking is completely different.
Yeah.
Mountain biking, we don't care about aerodynamics in mountain biking.
No.
Yeah.
I have a race question. Just this seems like with yesterday's announcement about Kona, does that not mean everything
Thank
ahead
you.
of that is now?
Yeah. I can't believe they haven't announced Canada yet. Like
So frustrating.
they should just announce it. I don't know what they're doing.
I can tell you why.
Tell me.
I've had some conversations with the race directors at Penticton, and I've had some conversations with a few other race directors in the Ironman series. The race directors themselves do not have the power to announce races not taking place. It is a corporate decision on Ironman's part. Because Ironman has been sold And so Wanda is still mid-transaction to the new parent group. They're not making a whole ton of decisions as to what's going on. My understanding is that they will cancel races 30 days out, officially.
That's too soon. Like
That's not enough time.
No.
I have a lot of tears to cry, and I don't think 30 days is enough time to cry them all.
Everybody knows, like, I mean, everybody knows. It's not
Everyone knows, but like I still feel this like stupid sense of responsibility to be like the just in case train. Like I need to be ready for the just in case, which means it's going to pour rain on Saturday in Vancouver, and I'm going on a 5-hour ride in the rain with my bike that I'm going to have to clean before and after.
Just clean it after.
Okay. You know, like I don't know. It's just.
I agree. It's hard for us too because we have a camp scheduled, and so we're like, we can't really cancel the camp until the race is canceled, or what do we do? Like we're kind of just in a holding pattern.
Yep.
I thought I read somewhere on an Ironman site that they said they would let people know 50 days. It would be 50 days prior to the race date that they would be making an announcement. So,
yeah. The only exceptions to that so far have been with provincial bodies. So like for Mont Tremblant, they sent an email out to Mont Tremblant athletes saying, hey, we're likely going to have to cancel this because the government is not going to let us run our event because we've got certain impositions upon us.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But Ironman itself has not come out and canceled that event outright, because if Quebec opens up and says, hey, we're going to let it go, then Ironman's going to let it go. If you think about it from a Kona standpoint, so currently right now, there are probably only 60 athletes globally that have qualified for Kona. So Ironman doesn't want to cancel events because they want Kona qualifiers. They need Kona qualifiers. They had to move Kona more to do with travel restrictions as opposed to racing restrictions, but it does open the window up for them where if they can run a whole slew of fall races now and get qualifiers for February, then they'll get them. Mm. But as it stands, if they were to run Kona in October, they would have 200 participants. And it's far too expensive for them. And that's assuming they allow all pros into the race. And then assuming 60 people that qualified at Arizona and the 3 other races that were run in the fall. So it's quite the conundrum. Everybody's in a holding pattern on it, and it's a similar holding pattern. It sucks. It completely sucks for everybody involved, coaches, athletes. Think of the businesses that depend on the income generated from all these races that have or have not taken place as well too. You know, hotels, restaurants, all of it. Mm-hmm. So it's really unfortunate. The best thing we can do is keep yourself going, right? Make sure you're training yourself to be 75-80% ready to go. And then that last month, if it happens, then great, that crank it up so you can hit that 100% on race day. I think that would be my advice. Mm-hmm. But keep in mind, I mean, I'm not racing or signed up for this year.
Your hair is not very arrow. I know it would be under a helmet, but still.
Oh, no. I can make it arrow. I'll just spike it right up the middle.
That's better, Jeremy.
I'll mohawk it. Well, guys, I really appreciate you taking the time on a Friday morning again, and I really appreciate Jazzy asking me to come and speak to you guys one more time.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. You're awesome. Before you go, I wanted to just ask, there is one more thing. It's not for this one, but I think a really awesome tutorial by you, and this is something I have struggled with, it is not just changing a flat tire, but I've had a few instances over the last 2 decades where I'm trying to change someone's tire at a camp, like and the bead on the tire is so ridiculously hard to get off. I'm at a loss. There's been 1 or 2 times where I've just been like, I can't change this. I don't know how to do it. So again, not to answer now, but I'm sure lots of people have ended up in that situation where you're like, A, how do I get the bead of this thing off the rim? And B, how do I get it back on? Like I've had 1 or 2 times where I've just been like, oh my gosh, I need a better strategy. So
okay,
that might be a good one.
You know what? That would be a fantastic one. just on that topic then, how many of you guys practice changing a tire? Okay. How quick can you guys change a tube or a tire on your bike? So I'm just going to go in order of screens here. So Brahmi, how quick can you go?
I don't know. I've never timed it, so I guess I don't practice enough.
Okay. Michelle?
Like 5 minutes.
Okay. Lindsay?
Probably 2 or 3 minutes.
Yikes.
Joanna?
No way. Or-
It totally depends if it's the front or back, and I couldn't time it, but I feel very confident on the front tire.
Okay.
That it's
Right.
fast.
Andrew?
Yeah, I'm really bad on 10 minutes.
Okay.
I'm
All right.
shitty at it.
Okay. Joanne?
And I'm the same. I'm not. The front tire would be faster than rear tire, but
Okay. All right. And then I don't know who's watching on Alicia's screen, so we'll see if they'll answer. Nope, no answer.
Oh, there. Yeah.
Too long.
Okay. I'm sorry, this might be a little long-winded, but I have a fantastic story about this. I have a very close friend who did her first Ironman in 2004. In fact, I went up to Penticton to cheer her on with her husband and my wife. And that was what got me hooked to sign up for Ironman Canada for 2005, was watching her race. She'd never changed a flat tire. So her husband thought it would be kind of fun for her to practice. And they had a massive upstairs deck in Kit's Beach that overlooked Kit's pool. So he invited 7 of his friends over for a keg party. They had a keg up on the roof, and he decided that was the time for Donna to learn how to change her tire. So she went and took her wheel off, came outside, let the air out of her tire, and grabbed the tire levers and tools and started changing her tire. And probably about 20 minutes later, got the tire pumped back up. Handed it over to Paul, and Paul looked at it, and was all proud, and reached down and grabbed an ice pick and jammed it right into her tire and handed it back to her and said, "You get another flat." And he did this to her 6 times in front of all of his friends while getting pissed on a keg of beer.
That is just mean.
It was so mean, but so relevant because she had to change her tire that many times. By the end of it, she was able to change a tire in under 3 minutes. If you're a road racer, okay, the rule of thumb in a group ride is if you go beyond 5 minutes, you got to buy everybody a beer. If you go beyond 10 minutes, you got to buy everybody lunch. If it takes you longer than 15 minutes, you're buying dinner.
That's presuming the group will wait for you. The winter ride that I do, they don't wait. You're fucked. You're done.
Okay, so I grew up racing in Montreal, and we had this French-Canadian coach whose mandate was that if one person gets a flat, the entire group gets a flat.
That's not the mindset
Yeah, you need
of
new
the winter ride.
So if you practice it, you can get it down quickly. I've been able to successfully change a rear in under 90 seconds. Right? Practice. This is one of those skills where the more you do it, the better you get. Right? Now don't try and hit the home run on the first try. Do this multiple times. And the easiest thing to do is when you're watching Netflix right now, grab a wheel, change a flat. Right? Go through the steps, be methodical. I would love to do a session with you guys on this because I do have a priority of how I change a tire. It takes probably about 20 minutes to show you guys how to do it, and then you guys can walk through it. But if you do that set, you can get under 90 seconds if you're good. If not, you'll be under 3 minutes easily. Right? And that goes for all the new rims. So Jasper, to answer your question, one of the reasons you couldn't get that tire off, the new rim technology is such that you have to actually break the bead on both sides of the tire. That's the trick.
I see.
Yeah. Cool. But yeah, if you guys are keen on that, I'm happy to do
We'll
it.
line that up. I think that'd be a really good one to do.
Yeah. And if we do line that one up, then I'll make sure I keep my tubular tire on. I was about to change these this weekend, but I'll keep that on. And that way you guys can get a view of changing a tubular as well.
That'd be awesome.
All right.
That'd be great.
Cool. Thanks so much, man. That was great. Thank you.
Anytime.
Thank you.
Help, guys.
Awesome.
Great.
Thank you.
Have a good week and
Have
weekend.
a good weekend, everybody.
See you, buddy.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.